Is RFK Jr. going to drop out of the presidential race and endorse Donald Trump? That's what we're going to take a look at today, and yet another potential shakeup to this 2024 election. We'll do some news, we'll do polling, we'll do a little bit of speculation, so let's get into it. First, we've got this ABC News article. It says, RFK Jr. expected to drop out of race by end of week, plans to endorse Trump. Given everything we've seen in this race, I would say it's only a moderate shakeup, but I would still say it's pretty unexpected from my point of view. His quote here says, I will not confirm or deny that, and we're not talking about any of that. And it is key to keep in mind that this actually might not happen. It says sources cautioned the Kennedy decision is not yet finalized and could change, with one source adding that Kennedy's hope is in part to finalize things quickly in order to try to blunt momentum from the Democratic National Convention. One possible scenario being discussed is for Kennedy to appear on stage with Trump at an event in Phoenix. That would be on Friday, but Trump sources say there's no plan for that yet. Now, if this does happen, I would say that's probably the time to do it right after the DNC. If there is any kind of an additional bump for Harris, Kennedy, the independent and number 3 candidate in this race, dropping out and supporting his rival Trump, that would be a big splash in the news cycle, and you would think it would take away some attention from Harris, put some of it back on Kennedy and Trump. He says down here that he has a couple of potential paths forward, not only 2. That's going to be from his campaign manager. So how many paths does Kennedy really have? Well, it depends what his goal is. If his goal is to win the general election, at this point it does seem like it's about 0. Now, if his path is to have an impact on this race, but not become president, candidates are always going to love to project confidence and indicate they've got a ton of different paths. Kennedy then goes after Kamala Harris here. He says, I think it was a coronation. It's not democracy. Nobody voted. Who chose Kamala? It wasn't voters. Then at the bottom, we've got a quote that says, she went in 4 weeks from being the worst liability for the Democratic Party to the second coming of Christ without giving one interview, without showing up for a debate, without a single policy that anyone thinks isn't ridiculous, he said. I do agree with his general sentiment that not that long ago, Harris was considered quite unpopular. Then out of nowhere, she turns into Obama-level popularity. Of course, Democrats love it. They think the polling is all real. Republicans don't buy it. They think it's inflated. My view has always been, given how close this race has always been expected to be, an extreme burst of popularity does not seem sustainable given the polarization. If she was popular before, I could understand it. I'm not saying she hasn't gone up. I'm just saying I can understand some doubts behind the numbers. Maybe the pollsters are misreading the electorate, or maybe it is all legitimate and everything is going to go Harris's way and she's going to win every battleground. We really don't know. Everybody's got their own take. We'll have to wait until the election. But what about Kennedy and his campaign? Well, I think this headline here pretty much sums up the entire thing. RFK Jr. shows up too late to testify in court against Democrats' ballot challenge in Pennsylvania. Ever since Kennedy decided to challenge Biden and then later on switched and became an independent, most Democrats have absolutely despised him. The fear is that he would have taken more votes away from Biden than Trump. It's anybody's guess what would actually happen, but I could see that happening as well, maybe a 3-to-2 type of ratio. Now, for pretty much all of Kennedy's life, he was clearly a Democrat. He would arguably have progressive policies on the environment and corporate power. There's a whole lot there that aligns with the Democrats, but he ended up having some different views on a couple of issues, including vaccines, and then he challenged the incumbent president, so that did not win him any favors. So when he tried to go off on his own and attain ballot access, Democrats clearly did try to step in and prevent him from getting on those ballots. There's a lot of lawsuits that took place. It's hard to say that that part is not anti-democratic. They might think Kennedy's just a spoiler, he's a grifter. All that stuff is out there. But I think any third-party candidate on either side, whether it's Kennedy this time from the Democrats or maybe a libertarian candidate on the Republican side, the two major parties, they're going to do what they can to stop them from getting on the ballot. They have that fear that they're going to take votes away from their side. We all might recall Ross Perot in the 90s, maybe Ralph Nader in 2000, maybe Jill Stein in 2016, or maybe Gary Johnson in 2016. The two parties are absolutely scared of this type of thing. So usually what happens is a lot of smears come in. That's how you know you're a real threat. So earlier in the year, my sense of the coverage of Kennedy was that it was unfair and mostly unfavorable. However, Kennedy has also not done himself many favors. As indicated in the first part of this headline, he showed up to testify too late in court. Now maybe his explanation about a flight being canceled is legitimate, but he's got other stories about the bear in Central Park, the brain worm. It does go on and on. Again, because I think it's an outside threat, a lot of that is going to be amplified. So Kennedy has been painted in all different directions. I've seen him have a lot of support online. He's been called a spoiler, fringe, the only true candidate in this race who's going to stand up to the corporate two-party duopoly. There's a whole lot there, but it has been a wild ride for Kennedy, and so far he's stuck it out. If we get on 538 and take a look at his favorability ratings, going back to last summer, he had positive favorables. It wasn't until earlier this year in the spring, that's when his favorables flipped, and now he's underwater. My best guess is before this flipped, most Democrats were skeptical of RFK. They don't like how he challenged Biden, and a lot of negative media coverage had him underwater on that side. Then later on, it looked like Trump became scared of Kennedy as well. Both Biden and Trump wanted to keep him out of the debate. I've seen Kennedy go after each side, but once Trump did start to go after him a little bit more, I think that caused his support with Republicans to sink, and now it seems like Kennedy has cobbled together support a little bit from disaffected voters from the Democratic side, Republican side, and some independents. Plus, I think a good chunk of voters that were actually going to not vote at all would come out for Kennedy. Now let's see where things are at with the current polling. So here's the Real Clear Politics aggregate. Harris is at 46.4, Trump is at 44.8, Kennedy is at 4.5. But Jill Stein and Cornel West are under 1 point, so Harris is up 1.6. The only real outlier here is Rasmussen. They've got Trump still up 4 points. The Kennedy support in all these polls ranges from just 2 in the CBS poll up to the Issues and Insights poll on the bottom where he's at 7. So that's mid-single digits, maybe even low single digits territory for Kennedy. That's definitely not going to win him any states, and usually third-party support declines on election day. I understand some people might claim that Kennedy's support is underrepresented by pollsters. There is a chance that pollsters are missing Kennedy's support, whether it's unintentional or intentional. It does look like Kennedy's support has dropped. We can confirm that by going down to the graph. Going back to late last year, Kennedy was over 15% in the aggregate. He looked like a potential contender there if he were able to get his support up a little bit higher. A lot of voters did not want Trump or Biden. But then again, as we got into this year, more into the spring and then into the summer, he did get his running mate Nicole Shanahan, but he did kind of hit a brick wall in some of these states with getting on the ballot with all the lawsuits. Then his support dropped under 10%. And then over the past month or so, once Harris got into the race, it looks like his support has dropped to about 5 in the aggregate. And meanwhile, in that same time, Harris's support has eclipsed Trump's. Again, a lot of this is still fresh and things could always change over the final couple of months. But if Kennedy drops out and endorses Trump, what could happen? Well, first of all, my best guess is that Democrats are going to all of a sudden want Kennedy on the ballot as an independent. They're going to hope that's going to take support away from Trump. So a lot of hypocrisy I would expect there. And of course, I would also expect the same thing out of Republicans if they had a threat that was perceived to come from their direction. Usually a libertarian candidate, but it could also be a more right-leaning independent. Both parties are going to be guilty of the same behavior. In this case, though, it is the Dems. But would Kennedy's support transfer over to Trump or Harris? Well, here's an article from Washington Post, but this is from almost a couple of weeks ago. This shows that once Harris got into the race, the polling with third-party candidates did shift toward Harris. You can see they've got 6 polls here. And in just a head-to-head matchup, those are the numbers on the right just between Harris and Trump. The left numbers throw in the third-party candidates, and you can see every one of these polls did shift at least 1 point toward Harris. So this is trying to make the case that between Harris and Trump, Kennedy is taking more away from Trump and helping Harris. Now again, this could all be a honeymoon period for Harris. It remains to be seen what would actually happen. You can read more about this polling here, but again, this is from almost a couple of weeks ago. When it comes to polling and politics, that's kind of outdated. Let's move on to the last article, and this is more recent. This asks what happens if Kennedy endorses Trump, and I like how they have the lone Kennedy supporter here with the shirt, sitting with all the empty rows of seats behind him. I guess it kind of indicates the state of the race for Kennedy. And the first sentence here says it seems increasingly likely that Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s odd, doomed bid for the presidency is nearing its end. So they have odd, they have doomed bid. I don't think they're a big fan of Kennedy. But then there's a little bit of discussion about Kennedy and his support, and a lot of it goes back to the days of Biden. But of course, that is super outdated at this point. But feel free to pause if you want to read some more of this. And as always, all the links will be down below in the description. But if we go down a few more paragraphs, it says in Pew Research Center's polling released last week, in July, Trump had a lead over Biden, with Kennedy earning the support of nearly 1 in 6 respondents. In the new poll, Harris is up and Kennedy's support has been cut in half. Of those who supported Kennedy in July, 4 in 10 shifted to Harris, compared with 2 in 10 who switched to Trump. And then everybody loves visuals, so we've got the graph, and that shows what they just described. In July, Trump was ahead of Biden, and Kennedy had a decent chunk of support there. Looks like it's around 15%. Then in August, Harris has the lead, and Kennedy's support has pretty much been cut in half. Looks like it's at about 7% or so. And then under that, this shows you how the support has shifted since July. Then it says that could suggest that more of what's left of Kennedy's support is aligned with Trump, meaning a Kennedy withdrawal might boost Trump anyway. But then they have data from their own poll here. Harris has a 3-point edge over Trump among registered voters when Kennedy is included, and a 4-point edge when it's just her against Trump. Their poll included a small number of Kennedy supporters, again because he doesn't have that much support, but they are more likely to view Harris favorably, 29%, than Trump, 15%. They were also more likely to view Trump strongly unfavorably, 41%. And then they get to the sentence that I agree with the most. What many of them might do is simply stay home. If you're supporting Kennedy because you don't like Harris or Trump, perhaps you'll be compelled by Trump's promise to include Kennedy in his cabinet or give him some government position where he can do whatever he thinks needs to be done. Or maybe you'll just make a sound of frustration and write off the whole thing. It's one of the challenges of being considered the outsider candidate. Moving to the inside isn't necessarily what you're supporters want to see. So there's a lot of speculation on all sides. But my best guess is if Kennedy dropped out and endorsed Trump, Trump could gain a half a point, maybe up to 1 point. Now, in a close race, that could be everything. Harris could also go up slightly, probably a little bit less than Trump. I would guess those are going to be voters that think Kennedy is a sellout, and they're going to be put off by him switching his allegiance to Trump. For the most part, I think a lot of those voters would just stay home. Some of them would go into other third-party candidates, maybe the Libertarians. But that's what I think would happen at this point. It all does depend on the details, if Kennedy is promised a cabinet position, if they campaign together, what kind of media coverage they get. I'm guessing that's not going to be too favorable, but maybe it just doesn't really move the needle much. Maybe it does more than I think. Maybe it helps Harris more. Who knows? But how likely is this to even happen? Well, if you get on Polymarket, it looks like it's very likely to happen. It's at 88% as of the time I'm making this video. So this could have already happened by the time you watch it. But if you go back to just a few days ago, there was only a 7% chance this was going to happen. So this really did come out of nowhere. I think a lot of people are stunned. I don't blame Kennedy for doing it. He really had almost everybody against him. He does have some unforced errors, that's for sure. For the most part, on paper, it looks like he's a Democrat. But once you have a couple of views that go outside the box, then many times things change. And I'm sure most Democrats are going to despise Kennedy now. There's going to be that fear that it's going to help Trump. Most Republicans are going to come back around to Kennedy. They're going to be on his side again. But will this really matter in the end? Again, there's more than 2 months to go. Anything can happen. But I'll close it out on this article from a couple of years ago. This is from the U.S. Senate race in Arizona. There was a Libertarian candidate in that race between Mark Kelly and Blake Masters. Right toward the end of the race, that Libertarian dropped out and did endorse Blake Masters, the Republican. In the end, it didn't really do much. Kelly still won it relatively comfortably. Now, maybe he dropped out too close to the end, but that's a similar situation. Every situation is unique. I do want to point out, though, in this picture, it looks like Blake Masters is a giant there compared to Mark Kelly and Mark Victor, they're Libertarian. So this is the latest political bombshell. And like with everything, it all depends on how you want to look at it. I think there is so much hypocrisy, cynicism, and selling out in politics. You could say it just happened on the Republican side with Nikki Haley and some others. They were against Trump. Then once he's no longer a threat, they're endorsing him. You could also find it on the other side. People like Bernie Sanders or AOC, who are supposed to be much to the left of the Democratic establishment, they're supposed to shake up the system, but then they come around and endorse Biden and then Harris. There's a case to be made with a ton of politicians on different sides. But that's it for this one, so let me know in the comments, what do you think about this news about Kennedy dropping out and endorsing Trump? Are you surprised, and what do you think it's going to do to the race? Is it going to help Trump a little bit? Is it going to help Harris? Is it going to be a wash? Do you like Kennedy? Do you not like him? Let me know down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to help support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.